about trends, opportunities, and the future of RegTech. And this has been some things that you also been discussing. So if I may ask you, Gino, just to stop sharing the screen, then I will get the other members already up. And I see Richard. So Richard, please take the floor and lead us to an interesting panel discussion with these brilliant speakers.
Thank you very much, Kuehn, and delighted to be and delighted to be on this panel as well. As you say, we're looking at the future of RegTech and trends. So you know, pretty big task, but I think we're all up to it, and we'll do our best to cover some of those key points. I think we'll go through our panel and do some introductions, but a little bit about me. So Aperio Strategy is an advisory firm, sort of focused on scale-up firms, working with incubators, accelerators, and we do operating in RegTech, fintech, and data science more generally. But we also do some work with policymakers and regulators at the intersection, particularly around what's more effective policy frameworks and how do we leverage the innovation functions. And I think those are all critical aspects of our discussion today about the future of RegTech and how do we create a dynamic real-time risk and compliance function, both within the entity, but also at a system level. And we see that as a goal stated in different aspects of it. And we'll examine some of those, and very lucky to be joined by some excellent practitioners across different areas that are all important in understanding and designing and delivering kind of a more effective RegTech ecosystem and system. So we have Olus joining us from who's a senior strategy advisor at SEQVOIA. So Olus, you can say that properly when you speak.
We have okay.
And we have Whynde Kuehn, who's founder and managing director of SE Transformations. Welcome, Whynde. And David Bundi, who's head of compliance, RegTech and LegalTech at PwC Legal. And Erkan Wisler, founder of RegTechImpact. And it'd be great if you could say a little bit about yourselves as we go through our discussion and we turn to each of you for comment. And so to give us some, just to follow on that conversation, some examples of where we've seen a kind of a vision set out about what the full potential of RegTech can be, is in a couple of critical areas, I think. So one of those is digital regulatory reporting and the idea that we move from where we are now to an ideal state of machine readable regulation that's ingested into your enterprise, is allocated to your business with the controls and straight through reporting. And we've seen that as a ideal world, and we've seen regulator-led innovation to try and design and deliver that and test that to some extent, and we've seen some real-life examples of that. I think digital identity, the extension and interoperability of that, not just within financial services, but clearly to other services around principles of control for the entity, both consumers and the business, and providing not just safe and secure systems in terms of crime, but perhaps as importantly, lower cost access to all sorts of services. And I think that's an important area for this panel discussion, is not just RegTech in the context of financial services, but how do we create this dynamic interoperable system across multiple industries as well. And of course, the development and application of machine learning, and we see that accelerated, and we see real life examples and impact in multiple industries, from healthcare, finance, production to supply chains, and again having real world impact on people's lives and the economy as well, and as a critical tool to helping to transform the risk and compliance function from a reactive function to a real-time, dynamic, proactive and preventative function that's focused on better outcomes for people, businesses and society and risk. So that's our big vision. And I guess my first question, I'm going to turn to Erkan and say, do you share that vision? And can you, speak to some examples about what you see our future state should be and can be?
Thank you, Richard.
when we talk about RegTech and about dynamic risk and compliance, I think we should think about the use of common terminology and understanding of RegTech. Why I'm telling that? I mean, if we talk about RegTech and false expectations, so often lead to the question, is RegTech a short-term hype or a sustainable strategy? I mean, if we talk with the customers or with the governmental side, it's always difficult to have an answer for that. And for me, actually, RegTech is a sustainable strategy. Why? Good corporate governance practice will be the key competitive factor in the future. And RegTech can make an enormous impact on it. And the introduction of RegTech solutions does not necessarily have to be a result of a long-term running project and with a final big bang. It can be implemented across the company. I mean, started with a small step and then being bigger. I think if we're talking about RegTech, we should think about first the time is the, how we can say, it's much more critical to identify the right individual process in the organization. I mean, how we can automate this kind of RegTech solutions. I mean, the problem is we think about dynamic risk and compliance, actually. This is a very high level. And I think it's important, it's very important. And although, for example, the Deutsche Bundesbank have some projects, I'm going to talk with that topic later. But furthermore, we should focus in how instead of what, actually, sorry, I'm saying again, what is RegTech and what is the how of RegTech solutions? I mean, we should more focus on the result and on the impact of RegTech.
Sorry, Erkan, I think that's a really important point, because you kind of have to start somewhere and build it to see where it's going to go, and you have to do both at the same time, and to test some of those assumptions right around that potential. So I think that's a really important point. Whynde, I'm going to turn to you for kind of maybe a broader perspective around how you think about broadly risk and compliance and some of the issues that you think are important as we move forward. You know, both in terms of what our end goal could be and should and could be, and to Erkan's point, how we get to there as well.
Absolutely, and yeah, I love both of the points from you and completely agree. And, to your point, Richard, maybe I'll take it even a step further. Now, my perspective is from being an architect and change leader of sort of enterprise-wide and cross-enterprise, business and digital transformation, just to frame that. But I think there is, there's maybe even a different way to think about, regulatory and compliance function. And that is, I think there's some shifts. Let me first talk about what I think are some catalysts for it, right? There are, I think, more and more groundswell that we're really seeing turning point around sustainability, ethics, and even changing public and customer perception. And I think we've even seen this escalate in the pandemic. And just to give a few data points, I mean, it's moved out of do-goodery too. Mark Carney talking about we need a sustainable, banking system, or, groups like the Tory Project showing that companies that are ethical and focus on stakeholders actually have better shareholder profits. Or even in the US, the Business Roundtable last year, which is the CEOs of the largest companies like GM and Accenture and things like that, they came out and changed the purpose of a corporation to be not shareholder focused, but stakeholder focused. So that includes, customers and employees and public and environment and things like that. So all that to say, in my biggest vision anyway, risk and compliance shifts from, enforcement to steward of our world. It shifts from have to do it to want to do it. and shifts from somebody's job, some people's jobs, to it's all of our jobs. And, how do we truly embed this, looking at, deploying responsible AI and I'll kind of leave it at that. But I think that's the bigger shift that I see, is total different mindset.
Absolutely. And I think that's right. So it's whether it's within an entity at prevention to enablement, or whether it's at a society level. And I love the point about sustainability, because that clearly is it's rising up the agenda as a specific risk function, and we see that with the work by Mark Carney being picked up now by the Bank of England in particular, with some of their proposals as well. But I'm going to sort of narrow down, David, with you, if you don't mind, and let's just pick up on that point around how we see the compliance and risk function changing, and is it changing, and how do you see this change and transition actually happening in practice, on the ground, based on the the kind of day-to-day work plus the vision that you have around the function?
Yeah, happy to. Hello, everyone, and thanks for the great points, Whynde. It fits perfectly into the next picture. So I see really RegTech about ensuring compliance and enabling business. I mean, at all times, compliance has not been done just for the sake of compliance themselves. Compliance is always linked to a business, and of course, compliance ensures that everyone is aligned and is it stays in line with all the regulations we have. But there is a business, and there's an understanding of the business which is key, and also an understanding of the customer, of course. And so, for example, if we take like GDPR, which is certainly has good points. So it's the data protection regulation in Europe, and there are many defensive aspects to protect basically the customers. But what's key, I think, is also to think about what the customer actually wants to do. And if we link that about on the concept of Forrester about zero party data, this is a concept where basically the consumer actually really acknowledges and proactively, intentionally wants to give the data to the bank to do something with it. And I think that's also a very important point, that we see both aspects. So if we think about compliance and also think about RegTech, I think, yes, there is like this defensive play, right? Secure, to safeguard, to set the boundaries that really the business can grow. So it's a bigger picture than maybe the very traditional one, where you know the compliance officer for the person who says no, you're not allowed to do something with very good reason. If we put it maybe in a bigger context and see what are like the challenges of today, so I would say one big challenge is definitely around education everywhere in any aspect. And one big opportunity which is coming up stronger and stronger is everything around emotions, emotionalization, incentivization of things. And to get back to very practical examples, if I remember over the years that I had to do basically on the PC, those AML compliance trainings every year, and it was like to some extent a bit boring, and everyone had to do it. I really think if we think a bit about the dimension of gamified compliance, where you basically try to set in some incentivations and also some advanced usability, advanced factors that kind of make the trainings likable, then the effect will be much stronger. So the long-lasting effect of all those educations, because at the end of the day, it's not about ticking up or signing off that we have read the policy and done the training. It's about really helping the people to do what's right. And this is just like the first step about gamified compliance, where you help people train. The next step is then obviously when we think about another topic which might be boring to some extent, AML transaction monitoring, which is also very repetitive. And right now also we are looking into it with a company where we think, how could we change the way we perform those repetitive compliance tasks, which to some extent need to be done by people, which to some extent can be done by technology, but how can we incentivize the entire organization, also emotionally, to simply do the right thing and do it intrinsically without thinking all the time about the compliance officer, which might hit you if you don't do it right.
Great. No, absolutely essential. So culture, mindset, education, incentivization. And I think, as you said at the beginning, in the context of, how does that role evolve to more enablement, right? Safer enablement, clearly, but more enablement as well. And but obviously to do that, we have to have the data and the tools to enable that process and that transformation. And this is where I want to bring Olus in to talk a little bit about that, based on what you do, every day and around the data strategy, but also how that's used effectively to enable the kind of tools and the sort of engagement that David's talking about. It'd be great to get your perspective on where you think we are now and what you think needs to change to accelerate this process.
Hello, Erkan. Thanks, Richard. Well, as you mentioned, I think that we all agree that all the regulations now are moving towards data responsibility. Whynde says it very well. She said, well, from enforcement, we are coming to become stewards, because everything regarding data collection, storage, privacy, and giving back on regulatory comes to the responsibility of the regulated companies more and more. GDPR, MiFID, EMIR, BCBS, etc. So I think that's I'm in RegTech for a couple of years now. I think that we're moving into the right direction, but it's still not yet optimal. We still have to bring meaning and context on data to the companies, because most of the asset managers, financial companies, healthcare that I'm talking with, they still miss a bit of perspective. I mean, yes, okay, banks are replacing mainframes, they buy some technological solutions, etc. But their architecture remains really complex still. They still struggle. And at one point of the chain, you still have people working on Excel, email, or Word to manage their GRC processes. So I think that's, there's a new concept now in business, which is the post-implementation care, which means that banks or regulated companies know that once they've implemented, they will have issues. And I think that we will have to help them have a holistic view and holistic structure who works fair. And I think that's, it becomes on the fact that data is all but homogeneous. You receive really different sources of data internally and externally, as you mentioned also, Richard. And we really have to make sure that these silo structures that we're building talk and interface with each other. And I think that that's really where we really have to make sure that the workflows and the data are harmonized among each other. And that's where I think that we will have and arrive to the efficiency era regarding RegTech. For me, RegTech become data management, actually.
Yeah, as you say, foundational, and get it, and just to pick up on getting that sequence right. So often we see people trying to plug things in which they just can't because they don't have the data access, or they don't have, they have some connectivity, but they don't, they don't have the systems and processes organized to do that. And actually, David, I would like to pick up on that point with you. I know, because this is something close to your heart, right? About how do we build effective platforms that enable the function to use these new tools, right, or new technology based on data sets and broader data sets more effectively.
I can say that the reason why I joined SEQVOIA was that the way that we try to arrange it is that we actually go sit with people on an organization and see, okay, what are your structure? Are you in financial? Are you in financial institution? Are you in aviation? Are you in healthcare, pharmaceuticals? Just let us know what your structure is and what are the different sources. Do you receive information from data vendors, brokers, clients? What are the data in and out? And we actually built a graph which can be scaled up, so it can be really implemented in a very efficient and quick way. it has to go really quick, and we create a bit of a data dictionary within the organization. We have to create a data dictionary where everything actually can be compiled and everything is structured, which can be scaled up afterwards by the organization, and manage the regulatory obligations that way, I would say.
Great. Yeah, sorry, absolutely. And so, David, I think just a quick question to you then is, so if we think about some of the smaller RegTech suppliers and how they are, consumed and used by the risk and compliance function, what do you see as some of the most promising way forwards to integrate those solutions more effectively?
So thinking back about my time as a compliance officer, I basically wanted that my issues are solved, right? And that they are not solved like partially, they just have to be solved and they should go away because the next thing is coming in. So it's like a quite busy job, right? If you are a junior or chief compliance officer, it's always like tremendous work, right? And how you call it actually doesn't matter at all. We can call it RegTech or whatever. It just has to be solved and go away. And I mean, there are fantastic solutions around in the market, but they are often like very specific, and what you have to solve is like an entire issue within a bank. And that's why I think we also need to help build platforms where those problems can be solved holistically, meaning that you have like a platform, and there are some banks like ING who do that in some locations really well, where you have a platform, and on this platform you have like 3 or 4 tools from different providers in the financial crime compliance area, which actually augment each other. And it's super important, obviously, that the links to those tools and also the data is able to flow through all those tools, and then basically you get the full picture which you want. On the other side, I mean, we cannot expect from a startup to come up with like a solution that solves the entire world of, like, let's say, the entire financial crime taxonomy, which is just massive. So I really think the big word here is interoperability of RegTech solutions, and with the right mindset and a bit of openness and a bit of investment, those platforms can be built, and we have examples in the market who do it very well. So I think that's a good way to go forward for all.
Yeah, perfect. Erkan, did you want to say anything about that approach from your perspective?
I really like that idea of interoperation and the data dictionary, what Olus does. It's like the common terminology. I mean, data is like being a RegTech key, but I think we are everybody talking about the same solutions or same idea. That is something really great on the panel.
Great, excellent. So something you 3 of you touched on here, I think, and this is a question back to Whynde, is this is great having tools and processes, but as you say, you have to integrate those into a process, into a workflow. And if you want to help, if that enables the kind of a transition from a reactive to a dynamic enabling function, that has to be part of a broader, function transformation and business transformation. And increasingly, we think, all of us, many of us, that really involves agile structures and processes, and not just at the functional level, but at an enterprise level. And Whynde, it'd be great to get your perspective on, do you think that is the case, and how do you affect that transition both at the functional level and enterprise, and what are some of the key points if we are to move to that environment?
Absolutely, and I do think it's absolutely necessary. I think agility and resilience, which is, I mean, they go together, but they're different things, are both tremendously important. I think we're finding competitive advantage in agility, right? If I can get my ideas into action quicker, right? My strategies, or if I can react to that regulatory response quicker, right? This is competitive advantage. I might argue it's starting to move into survival, right? So Richard, absolutely agreed. And just to clarify, when I say agility, because there is a big movement out there, as I think there should be, on creating execution agility. But what I think organizations also need is the end-to-end organizational agility. So a cohesive, right, ability to get from strategy or any change, right, any change to the business that we create or that is thrust upon us, right? So we can proactively sense and then respond, right, all the way into how do we plan, right, for the things that make the best sense, you know, how do we execute in a way that's coordinated. So I would say some hallmarks of agility in the sense that I'm speaking. One is that cohesive idea to action. And that requires coordination among teams to do that and do that well. And it requires having a perspective on the fact that we even need that, which leads to a second, I think, very important hallmark that underpins much of our challenges. And that is shifting from being focused in business silos to being focused on enterprise. And it's not like an either or, right? There's a hybrid here, but at least in my experience, you know, there is a lot of silos which lead to challenges in the regulatory and compliance space. Absolutely. They lead to challenges in where we invest our money and what we do. A lot of companies just do all, right? Because of needing to invest, even to customer experience. So I think breaking down the silos, and then we could take it further in saying interoperability between organizations, right? But to break down those silos requires organizational structure, right? Like self-organizing teams. It requires a mindset, even things like using open source. This collaborative idea underlies that. That's why I think this is such an important thing. And then also business architecture, and I'm going to come back to that. I think another hallmark is simplification of an agile organization and having the business and components, because if I have to change the same thing 10 times and that policy is in 10 different systems, I'm increasing my risk and I'm increasing the time it takes to change. And agile execution is part of this, but note that I kind of save it for last. So if I could just add one more bit around this concept of business architecture, I think it's an important keystone here for what we're trying to do. And some people will know what that is, some people who may not. When I say business architecture, I'm basically talking about a 360-degree view, high level, purely business speak, purely business perspective, capabilities, value streams, high level business information. And then I won't go into all the details, but we can connect it to policies and regs, right? And we can connect it to processes and apps. So why do we care? Because this business architecture, which is usually created across silos, so the business people agree, gives us our common language, gives us our common mental model. I can map risks or compliance, you know, on top of that. It gives us our starting point. Olus and you know, gentlemen, we've talked about the data, gives us the starting point for that data dictionary. So we know what the business people think, right? We can take it from there. And it also gives us a higher level traceability. So if I'm trying to understand compliance, I don't have to jump right to the processes and the systems, which we all know there's loads of detail. I can say, what capability is going on? All right, now let me get to that. And even interoperability, right, between companies and regulators. So GDPR, okay, that's related to customer information management capability. Here's where we also transcend industries, right, beyond finance, because I'm going to expect to see, right, those related regs manifesting in different systems, processes, et cetera, for that capability across orgs. So just a few points there.
Fantastic. Well, we could have a whole panel on all that, but because it's absolutely, you know, kind of fundamental to where we kind of need to go. But Olus, I know you wanted to jump in on a comment.
I was just, I totally follow what Whynde says, is that the regulated companies who succeed the most in RegTech adoption are the ones who are implementing scaled Agile, with Agile and Lean processes. And most of the time, some of the big, huge banks are way beyond on the small RegTechs who do the agile processes. So yeah, it's agility, and it's really, really key. So I wanted to add on that.
Yeah,
I fully agree with both of your points, Olus and Whynde. And basically, when you have all that, you know, all this framework ready, and you have talked to everyone to tear down the silos, I think then it's really like the moment. Okay, how do you move the organization? And I think there again, it's really about incentivizing, because I've read so many papers about, okay, no silos anymore in this big corporate, but then the incentivations were done, the targets, the year-end targets were set that you don't work together, and so on. So I think it's really like it all fits together. And in the end, we have to take the people with us after we have like the perfect concept and this really good way of thinking about the architecture. You explained, Whynde and Olus.
I think to add something, it's always about communication. Communication breaks down the silos, and RegTech is all about communication. And I think the compliance officers are specialized and didn't talk too much about with the colleagues. And I think there would be a change of being more compliance leader by talking with other people. Agile is very important, but it's a part of our journey, I would say.
Absolutely. So operationalizing agility, communication within those frameworks with the right incentives. And I kind of want to, I do want to pick up on another point, which you just began to touch on, Whynde, which is around interoperability within the ecosystem, and it's a kind of I don't know, a kind of concept of system agility, right? Which seems to be pretty important when it comes to highly regulated industries, right? So you have enterprise agility, but how agile is your system, particularly when it comes to real-time risk and management? And that also comes down to, you know, the vision that we do see being articulated around, you know, if we have data that's being exchanged real time through different mechanisms that standardized to enable that, a machine learning put on that to get real time insight, so that regulators can actually work with regulated entities to look holistically at the systems. You know, the real potential benefits there for system agility, proactive action, and to make the risk and compliance dynamic, you know, at a system level as well. And again, it's not a unique thought, that's been out there, and we see that as an end goal. But these steps from a enterprise agility at a regulated entity, but also enterprise agility at a regulator, right, as well, in order to operate in that, of kind of foundational steps on that journey. And if the danger is, as with any technology or data, if you plug that into a system that's not designed like that, you're not optimizing that technology and integration. And so that kind of leads us to our sort of last question area, which is really, you know, that's big and it's complicated. I think, Erkan, you made a point very well, is we have to start somewhere, right? And we have to start on that journey without worrying about solving all those things, and have the frameworks to work towards those. And one of the areas where we're all very aware of is the regulator-led innovation initiatives, where they're trying to act as catalysts to take the regulated entities and the innovators on that journey. And we've seen those, you know, deliver great, you know, sandboxes, tech sprints, and get to a certain kind of innovation outcome. But I think the reality is, you know, people are questioning, well, what happens next with that? How do we move and start to get from a really good test or a proof of concept to proof of value and deployment? And at the same time, we have very proactive regulators and policymakers looking at RegTech in the context of digital finance. So not just how do they address things like standards to support interoperability on things like digital ID, but also how do they start to tackle some of the issues around data sharing, the safe and responsible use of AI, and put the right regulatory frameworks and assets into that. And so I think we see the right moves. We see people understanding the right issues. But I guess the question to the panel is, if we get that alignment right and take those next steps, is that policy regulator-led initiative, is that the big catalyst for change, or do there need to be some big sort of other catalysts for change to move that forward? Again, David, I would like to turn to you first to answer that question.
I mean, it's a question of mindset, and it's a question of collaboration. So every initiative, is it from ADGM, from the FCA, from many other regulators, I think everyone is valuable and good. The regulators are very different in size and also in strategies, and also in, let's say, workforce. So different concepts apply to different countries, and they are all fine. But yeah, I think it's crucial that there is a collaboration between between like the banks, the regulators, the tech firms, the startups, also basically also the customers at the end, yeah, right, the population. So I think, as Erkan said before, communication is key. Staying in touch with each other. And then step by step, we see that things are moving on with the sandboxes, with the tech sprints. I think it's a very nice development. We are far from being at the end of it, right? It's still early, but these are good things, and we are in a good way.
Yeah, Erkan, so I know you have views around this needs to be a global effort, right? So do you want to just expand on that a little bit?
Yes, I can tell you a little bit more. I think it's important to have innovation, but I think the impact of RegTech is also more important. If I talk with CEOs, they want solutions. They wanted to have values. And if I talk with them about RegTech projects in a company, I always try to be very small. Why? And because you have to try it. And the big companies are not really agile, and failure is like being out. And in this context, I would say, if you want to set up a small RegTech project, give you a very description what I would start. I think the question should be, which processes are time consuming, for example? Are the process time consuming due to complexity or quantity? How high is this, or what can I say? How often is the process used? And are there rules defined? I mean, the most companies should look to the process and find there a good solution to try a RegTech solution, or doing RegTech in a risk and compliance landscape. And so yes, RegTech can be as automation technology and can be integrated step by step into process landscape. Small steps and then big shots. And that is something the supervisors also do. They try it with a sandbox, or they do it innovation, collaboration with startups. But the main goal, and that is something what I really appreciate, if we can do a big company. I mean, RegTech could be and have the potential to being a really good big company, and not only being only a startup. I have answered.
I think, yeah, no, I mean, that's a very important point. RegTech is, I mean, there is in some, there is a kind of a focus on the small innovative startup part of RegTech, but yeah, there are lots of technology companies that solve regulatory problems that have been around. I guess the way and I'm going to hone down on a particular point here, actually. I think the way I think about that, it's not that no one's been using technology. It's just that there are new technologies on new data sets, and the assumption and evidence is that if you apply these, you get better outcomes at lower cost. There has to be a value proposition there for someone trying to be compliant, but also a value proposition for a supervisor trying to ensure compliance and stability and manage risk, systemically. So so I think maybe the issue then about I'm trying something to get a business outcome, but I'm trying new technologies, and I'm trying technologies that are untested, and I have concern around my supervisor's view around those, and that's where to me, it seems that the focus continues to be around around the regulators, and this is why I think we're seeing some suggestions, initiatives that perhaps there should be independent certification bodies, right, that certify solutions to give that level of assurance. So regulators won't endorse a particular vendor, but they will look at the underlying technology, the outcome, and give some kind of form of assurance or guidance around. Well, some of them will, but it seems, yeah. So do you think that's that concept of some formalized, systemic, scalable way to give more assurance around the regulatory effectiveness of these new technologies and models that they have, is that critical? And how do we see that kind of evolving?
It's critical, and the most important thing is trust. If you start small and you get the trust of a company or the supervisors, as a formal ex-supervisory of him, I can tell you it's always about risk and trust. And that is something we have to, how can I say, win the trust of your customer or the regulatory. And that is something where I think RegTechImpact, or where I go, what I wanted to tell is how we can get trust and how we can be a RegTech. And that is something which being the trend in the future.
I think we can also kind of think back about what Kuehn said before in the last session. He also mentioned trust as the absolute essential, right, for the next steps. If we think about the digital assets, which is start growing and becoming more important, where Gino talked about, I mean, it's all about building trust. And I think it's also, one way is that we think about certifications. That's one way to see it. But another way is also to really think about new concepts where you basically, you can build trust by just having a good idea and gather the people around you, or you can have trust by having it certified. There are many ways to do that. And just as we're also talking a bit about new trends and new ideas as the title of this panel, I just want to give a very brief look into a topic I find currently very interesting, and it's about the Actors Foundation. So it's a bit complex, but just very, very short and quick. I mean, what we saw in the financial crisis was that basically there was really a lack of reporting granular data in a standard way, which was then able to be analyzed, and these inconsistencies and the shortcomings really led to a lot of risks. And if you think back really at the very beginning, what the bank is, it's basically it's all about cash flows, right? And those cash flows can be basically packed into a mutual agreement, and then we call that the financial contract. It's like very, very basic. And if we look what kind of financial contracts we have and what they are about, so they're about loans, about mortgages. So in the end, this is basically quite a manageable number of patterns. It's always a little bit the same with little tweaks here and there, but it's a system that is consistent if you really start from the cash flow point of view. And then it's as a next step, it's to think, okay, how do we now build that? And there is a domain-specific language, which is called Marlow. Domain-specific means that you have basically a programming language with some boundaries that you stay into a topic, and also gives you safeguards. And this Marlow language is built on the Cardano blockchain, but it can also be built on other ones. And with such a system, basically, that really provides you like high transparency, provides you much more possibilities to analyze what's actually happening in your bank. I mean, this is just like an amazing opportunity to look into and get insights for the CEO, for the COO, for the chief risk officer, for the compliance officer. So it's just like transparency is basically completes the picture and helps the entire organization, because first you need to know what's happening before you can really take the decisions. And now you can say, well, this is all super complex and all, and who is able to basically build such a financial contract. And the technological advancement is now at a stage where basically you can do visualized programming. So there is like a Marlowe playground where basically you can put together the pieces you want, like Lego pieces, and when you have put that in together without having any knowledge of coding, you have a financial contract which has a standard behind, which can be which can be analyzed. And I think this is a bit the way to go. If I remember back, just as an example, the old days you needed to code to know C++ to have a website, right? And the website looked horrible, whoever did it. And today we just apply the toolkit which is given to us by a lot of firms, and everyone can do, like in a few hours, an amazing website that everyone likes and that works. And I think in this way, I also see that with tools where, like Marlowe, where you have like this visual programming of financial contracts, which solve like enormous problems, and just provide opportunities. So this just a little highlight on what I found. And there are many such things if we just think a little bit further than what we have done the last 10 years.
Yeah, and I'm just, so before I get other people's comments on that, I just a very brief comment, because I completely agree. And what's important there is the combination of the kind of design thinking principles with the understanding of what the technology and tools can do now, right? So and not being constrained by that, but understanding what they can do. And I think, I mean, we haven't spoken about, you know, in depth about specific technologies, but, you know, but distributed ledger technology, you know, is a fantastic tool for potentially providing that the trust framework, right, into which you can build and program trust, right, and then and as you say, give more assurance around that just through the design and implementation, right, around that. And you know, we are, you know, not just talk about financial services, and you do see that, you know, being deployed, particularly in supply chain, right, and big supply chains. And then what that enables you to do is you rethink about how I integrate services into that and to the processes. As you simplify those processes, you automate those processes, and you intelligence to those processes, and you redesign insurance at each stage of that. And I think the supply chain is a really encouraging area. It's still a way to go. And there's some, you know, but where you have that, and you have interoperability across jurisdictions by definition of supply chain as well. But let me throw that open to others. You know, what do we think about that kind of catalyst of technology, design thinking, and how that will help us to accelerate this change to more dynamic risk and compliance? I mean, Whynde, I'm particularly interested in your perspective, right? As someone thinks about business architectures, right? So at a business level, but at a system level architecture, right? As a key enabler tool, and the importance of providing trust frameworks for that between those parties.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, specifically from the system perspective, which I really like. I appreciate your thought there. Working across organizations, I mean, ecosystem is the new organization, right? So examples come to mind, like banks, you know, redeciding what their role is and how they play in an ecosystem. Or, you know, I've worked across organizations where they decide they're going to go to market on a combined value proposition. So if I work in a bank, instead of giving them their home loan, what if we went across the whole home buying experience? So let's work with a realtor, let's work with banks, and let's work with retail stores that are going to fill those. So I think the interoperability, the trust framework, and something like that is tremendously important. And again, I'm thinking, even Richard, back to your question about our, regulator-driven innovation, is that a catalyst? Yes, I think that's a catalyst. Yes, I think sustainability, ethics, public, perceptions, it's catalyst. But I also think, and David, one of you guys had talked, you're talking about motivation, right? And I also think that organizations have to, they have to want it. And so the desire to create these ecosystems from a commerce perspective and an increased value delivery perspective invites and requires some of these things as well. So I think it provides a new opportunity. And maybe I'm thinking about, how does the data work together across the, these three industries, because we want this to work. We want to share customers. We want to get more market, but it's going to naturally, right, bring these things in as well as considerations. Yeah, food for thought.
And in everything, I would say also society has, more expectations, right? Before you ask the doctor something and you believed it. Now you first Google and then you go and talk to the doctor. I think it's all changing, and we see that although those neobanks are not perfect at all, I would say some are doing well, some less, but just the interest of a lot of people, of the population, in new offerings, in new solutions, shows that they are expecting more from the banks and faster from the banks. I'm not saying that the new banks will give that and the others, the old ones not, but the expectations are different. Also, when it comes to financial crime, it's not enough just to say, well, we have done the check boxes and we have applied the policies. At the end of the day, okay, did you really help reducing financial crime? Did you really prevent it? And if we look at the numbers, the numbers are still very high of all the crimes that are happening. So I think it's just like in many through the society, the expectations are higher, and we have the solutions to some extent, and really to also change and become better.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, we're almost at our end. We have kind of time for one last question here, and I do want to get onto this because it's kind of fundamental to how we affect and change to these more dynamic systems, right? Not just entities, but systems, and that's the cost and the funding, because these are big change programs. And one of the things that's happened, I think, with the impact of COVID is, we see this obviously in healthcare, is just. And we see this even in the IMF, right? And its policy recommendation recovery. It's like, well, the public sector is going to have to invest in stuff, right? To make it's not just a catalyst as a policy and a regulator. It probably has to be a catalyst in some kind of investment in this, right? So it doesn't mean it has to pay for and build and run it as a state monopoly. But I think I think this also coincides with what we're seeing, particularly around sustainable development and the concept of blended finance, where you have public sector investment that leverages private sector resource and investment. And that strikes me as a really, probably an important part of how we're going to facilitate the resources behind the change. And we see, from, MAS in Singapore, the concept of incentivize, financial incentives for change as well. We see new public assets being produced. So the FCA I've just started a digital sandbox, which the idea is that potentially becomes a permanent asset, data asset, to drive innovation and change around. And it just seems to me that there has to be this coordinated approach where there's this investment, a kind of seed stage of conceptually, that we can leverage on. I don't know what people think about that, whether that is the answer, whether you think there's a different answer, but it'd be great to get your views, all of you, on that.
If I might add, for example, take data, for example, let's take GDPR. What's the percentage of companies who manage their information on premise who are GDPR compliant? I would say 0, because at any chain, at one chain, it's now Olus wanted. Oh my God. But that's why, for example, an initiative to go to the cloud, which has been initiated by the Luxembourgish regulator, CSSF, the cloud directive, was a real catalyst to move towards efficiency, for example. So I truly believe that the initiatives of the regulators is really, really important. Where it develops the most, later are the most active, MIS, SEC, FINMA, FCA, CSSF, etc. So I believe that the regulator is really part of this catalyst on my part.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't even talked about cloud. Cloud seems that is foundational. I just can't see how we can do this without cloud. But anyway, we'll just assume everyone agrees to that. David, what's your view? I'm interested. But where do policy and governments put resource? They're not going to fund everything, but where can they add resource? Where would that help?
Well, I think it's in the interest of any government and society that the transparency works well and the entire system it works well. So I mean, you need to investing in a strong framework is investing in a strong marketplace. Then one side, but another side is also from the private sector. I mean, that's we have been helping investors to identify really top firms in the space, in the fintech, RegTech space, and so on. And if the solutions are there and they are powerful, they attract the investors, and the private investors will put in money because they know they will make much more money out of it. so it's both sides.
So I think that's an absolutely critical point. And one of the trends I think we're seeing, and again, it's in different industries, and even particularly in the development side in healthcare is. So one of the barriers to that investment is the risk around the scalability of those solutions. And clearly, if you're in a highly regulated industry, there's a lot of regulatory risk around that, right? So I think it's down to policymakers and regulators to work through these new mechanisms, to look at the effectiveness within their frameworks, to help accelerate the testing, understanding the scale. And if they can play their part in unblocking those barriers, those investors will invest, right? Because more. And as somebody who was a founding team member of a RegTech scale up that sold and had to raise money, I can tell you how painful those conversations are around. What does the traction look like? Not because of the effectiveness and the problem we solve, but this challenge around, do I do it? We won't go into that because but around, what's the regulatory view around that? Even though our solution had a very clear regulatory view around it, and even with that, it was a real problem. So anyway, on that point, we're done. Thank you very much. I don't know if we solved all of the world's problems on how we move to dynamic risk and compliance, but we gave it our best shot, and that's all that anyone can ask everybody. So thank you. It's been a pleasure to share the stage, and thank you, most importantly, to the audience for listening to us as well.
Thank you.
And of course, to Mona and the RegPack team for hosting us. I'll let us turn up.
Indeed, and it was a real joy to listen to this pinnacle of the event today with the all-star discussion about RegTech. And I think we all have a better view what the future may hold. And somehow I'm also glad that it was not just pinpointed as one outcome as a solution, but it was pretty much something that we can build as human beings together. And it's something that we do in a collaborative way. So it's really great talking about collaboration. I have my pleasure and joy to have my last duty of the day. Well, my day is only halfway, but for many of you joining here, you're ready.